Hello, in this podcast, we're going to be talking about misleading information as a factor affecting the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. Hello, Noema.
Hello, David. I'm ready to dive into it. Misleading information really does reshape memories, so let's break down how that happens. Where do you want to start? Leading questions or post-event discussions?
Let's begin with the research done by Elizabeth Loftus and John Palmer in 1974.
The classic car crash study. So Loftus and Palmer showed participants film clips of traffic accidents. Afterwards, they asked questions about what they'd seen. But they changed one key word. How fast were the cars going when they hit versus smashed? That word shift influenced participants' speed estimates and even whether they later remembered seeing broken glass that wasn't there. It's a great demonstration of how a single word can alter memory.
Yes, in fact, there were 5 groups of participants, and each of those groups was given a different verb in that critical question. So the one group had the verb hit, the others had contacted, bumped, collided, and then, of course, smashed, that very emotive one.
Exactly. And those verbs had a measurable impact. Participants who heard smashed estimated higher speeds and were more likely to recall broken glass. So this study really showed how leading questions don't just influence answers, they can actually reshape memory itself.
Yes, in fact, the people who heard the verb smashed, their mean recall was 40.5 miles per hour, whereas those who heard or saw hit, their mean recall was 31.8 miles per hour. So a significant difference.
That's a big difference. It shows how just one word can shift a person's perception of what they remember. It's not just about memory recall, it's about how fragile memory can be under suggestion. It's a great starting point for discussing how easily eyewitness testimony can be distorted.
And there are a couple of explanations for that, aren't there? The one is response bias.
Exactly. Response bias is when the wording of a question influences how someone answers. Like they think, oh, maybe I should say it was faster. The other explanation is the substitution explanation, where the misleading information actually changes the memory itself. So one is about how you respond in the moment, and the other is about how your memory gets reshaped.
And that substitution explanation is best illustrated by the follow-up experiment that Loftus and Palmer did, isn't it?
Absolutely. In that follow-up, they asked participants a week later whether they remembered seeing broken glass. Those who had heard the word smashed were more likely to remember it, even though no glass existed. So that's strong support that misleading information actually altered their memory.
Let's look now at research on post-event discussion. There is an incident in the street, let's say a traffic accident, and you have a number of witnesses, and they all talk about it together. What effect, if any, is that likely to have on their recall afterwards, and in fact, how they might respond to questions from the police about what happened?
When witnesses discuss an event together, they can unintentionally blend details from each other's accounts. So one person's memory might get contaminated with another's perspective. Research shows this post-event discussion effect can lead to witnesses recalling details they never actually saw because they've picked them up from someone else. So when police ask questions later, their recall may be altered, often unintentionally, by that prior discussion.
Right. So as you said, that's memory contamination. What about Fiona Gabbett and her team? They looked at memory conformity.
Yes, Gabbett and her team did a key study. They had pairs of participants watch the same crime, but from different angles, so each saw unique details. When they discussed it afterward, a large proportion mistakenly recalled details they hadn't actually seen, just picked up from their partner. That showed how post-event discussion can create false memories through conformity.
Right. Let's look now at evaluation. And as part of that, the real world application of the research. So what comments do you have as far as that's concerned?
Well, Loftus's research had a huge impact. It's been used to highlight the fallibility of eyewitness testimony in courtrooms. It's influenced how police conduct interviews, leading to the adoption of the cognitive interview, which reduces leading questions. So, it's a prime example of research shaping real-world practices to protect accuracy and fairness.
There is the argument that a lot of the research was artificial as opposed to having real-world reliability.
Yes, that's a valid critique. Many of Loftus's experiments were done in controlled lab settings, often with film clips, which lack the emotional intensity of real-life events. So while the findings are important, we must remember that real eyewitnesses are often under stress, and that can impact how generalizable these lab results are to real-world situations.
And of course, in a real-world situation, there are much more important consequences for the way you answer a question than they are in a lab study.
Exactly. In real-life situations, the stakes are high. Court cases, legal outcomes, even someone's freedom. So the pressure and responsibility on a real witness can play out quite differently than a volunteer in a lab. That's why applying the research to real investigative techniques, like careful interviewing, helps bridge that gap.
Going back to substitution, there's a limitation of that substitution explanation, which was explored by Rachel Sutherland and Harleen Hain in 2001. Would you like to tell us about that?
Absolutely. Sutherland and Hain found that not all memories are equally susceptible to substitution. Central details, those crucial to the event, are typically more resistant to being altered by misleading information. In other words, the substitution explanation works best for peripheral details, but core memories are more stable. So, memory isn't equally malleable across the board.
There's also evidence that post-event discussion actually alters eyewitness testimony. We spoke for a moment ago about conformity, but I'd like to look at Elin Skagerberg and Daniel Wright in 2008. Would you go on and share a bit more about that?
Of course, Skagerberg and Wright found that post-event discussion doesn't just create false memories through conformity, it can also spark new elaborations. So witnesses sometimes recall details that didn't come from the original event or the other person, but are created in the process of discussion. So post-event discussion doesn't just blur lines, it can actually foster entirely new distortions.
Okay, that's very interesting. So a takeaway from this short podcast, Noema.
I'd say the key takeaway is that memory isn't a perfect recording. Whether it's leading questions or talking to others afterward, our recall can be reshaped. So when it comes to eyewitness testimony, we need to handle memories with care, knowing they can be influenced, even when people are confident.
Right, thank you very much. In the next podcast, we'll be having a look at anxiety as a factor affecting the accuracy of eyewitness testimony.
That sounds great. Anxiety can really shake up memory accuracy, so I'm looking forward to that chat. We'll dive into how stress can either sharpen or distort what people recall. Until then, talk soon.